What happens when one of Britain's most respected actors walks into what should be a routine chat show appearance, only to discover the host has an agenda that goes far beyond friendly conversation? In just 27 seconds, a single condescending comment would transform a beloved television personality into the villain of his own show, leaving audiences stunned and questioning everything they thought they knew about late-night entertainment. The green room at the Jonathan Ross show buzzed with its usual pre-taping energy. Makeup artists touched up faces under harsh lights, while producers shuffled between guests with clipboards and fake smiles. Sean Bean sat quietly in the corner, his weathered hands folded in his lap as he watched the controlled chaos unfold around him. He had done this dance countless times before, promoting films and projects on talk shows across the country, but something felt different tonight. The veteran actor had arrived expecting the standard fare. Light questions about his latest project, perhaps a few jokes about his character deaths on screen, maybe some banter about his Yorkshire roots. What he could not have anticipated was that Jonathan Ross had spent the better part of the afternoon researching not his filmography, but rather a series of personal controversies that had nothing to do with why Sean was there in the first place. Jonathan Ross paced back and forth in his dressing room, his trademark grin absent as he flipped through research notes his team had compiled. The host had built his career on being the cheeky interviewer who could get celebrities to open up, to reveal something personal and entertaining for his audience. But lately, his ratings had been slipping, and the network executives had been breathing down his neck about making the show more relevant, more viral, more controversial. "We need something that gets people talking," his producer had told him earlier that week. "The safe interviews are not cutting it anymore. Push boundaries, make news." So when Sean Bean's publicist had called to book him for a simple film promotion, Jonathan saw an opportunity. Here was an actor known for being private, reserved, someone who rarely gave inflammatory quotes or engaged in celebrity drama. But Jonathan's research team had dug up some old interviews, some past relationships, some financial troubles that had been resolved years ago but could still make for compelling television if presented in the right way. As Sean was called to set, he adjusted his jacket and ran through the talking points his publicist had prepared. The film was a small, independent drama about working-class struggle in northern England, a passion project that had taken years to get funded. He was genuinely excited to talk about it, to share the story of how it came together and what it meant to him personally. The studio audience welcomed him with warm applause as he walked onto the familiar set. The bright lights momentarily blinded him as he made his way to the guest chair, waving politely to the crowd. Jonathan Ross stood behind his desk with that practiced smile, the one that had charmed millions of viewers over the years. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the man who has died more times on screen than any other actor, Sean Bean," Jonathan announced with theatrical flourish. Sean settled into his chair, already sensing something off in Jonathan's tone. There was an edge there, a sharpness that went beyond the usual playful ribbing, but he smiled and nodded to the audience, determined to keep things professional. "Sean, great to have you on the show," Jonathan began, his voice carrying that familiar lisp that had become his trademark. "Now, before we talk about your new film, I have to ask about something that's been fascinating our researchers." Sean's smile faltered slightly. This was not how these interviews typically started. Usually, there would be some warm-up banter, a joke about his character deaths, something light to get the audience laughing and put everyone at ease. "You see, we've been looking into your personal life," Jonathan continued, leaning forward with predatory interest. "And it seems you've had quite the journey when it comes to relationships and finances. 4 marriages, some well-documented money troubles a few years back." The studio fell quiet. This was not the playful celebrity roasting that Jonathan was known for. This felt invasive, personal, cruel. Sean's jaw tightened as he processed what was happening. "I'm sorry, Jonathan, but I thought we were here to discuss my new film," Sean replied evenly, though his voice carried a warning that anyone paying attention would have noticed. "Oh, we'll get to that," Jonathan waved dismissively. "But our viewers are interested in the real Sean Bean, the man behind all those dramatic deaths. Tell me, when you were going through your financial difficulties, did you ever think about taking some of those big-budget Hollywood roles just for the paycheck, even if they were beneath your artistic standards?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was supposed to be entertainment, but it felt more like a public interrogation. Sean's hands gripped the arms of his chair as he fought to maintain his composure. "My financial situation has nothing to do with my artistic choices," Sean said firmly. "And frankly, I don't see how it's relevant to why I'm here tonight." Jonathan's grin widened, sensing weakness. "Come now, Sean. Surely you can understand our curiosity. Here's a respected actor, classically trained, known for serious dramatic work, And yet you keep taking these roles where you die spectacularly. Some might say it's become a bit of a joke. Some might say a lot of things, Sean replied, his Yorkshire accent thickening slightly as his temper began to rise. That doesn't make them worth discussing on national television. But that's exactly what makes them worth discussing, Jonathan shot back. You've become something of a meme, haven't you? The actor who always dies? Do you embrace that? Or does it frustrate you that your decades of serious work have been reduced to a running gag on the internet? Sean stared at Jonathan for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The studio was completely silent now, the audience sensing that something significant was building. Even the camera operator seemed to lean in slightly, anticipating what might come next. You know what frustrates me, Jonathan? Sean said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous calm. What frustrates me is sitting here, trying to promote a film that means something important to me and my collaborators, only to have the host spend his time digging through personal matters that have nothing to do with my work. Jonathan's smile never wavered, but there was a coldness in his eyes now. Well, that's what makes for interesting television, isn't it? Anyone can sit here and give the same promotional sound bites. We're trying to have a real conversation. Real conversation? Sean's voice rose slightly. Is that what you call this? Because it feels more like an ambush. The tension in the studio was palpable now. This had gone far beyond the usual back and forth between host and guest. Lines were being crossed, boundaries violated, and everyone in the room could feel it. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the discomfort he had created. The power dynamic was exactly where he wanted it, with Sean on the defensive and the audience captivated by the brewing conflict. This was the kind of television moment that would be replayed on social media, dissected by entertainment blogs, and talked about for weeks. An ambush? Jonathan repeated with mock surprise. Sean, you're a public figure. Surely you understand that when you come on a show like this, people are interested in more than just your latest project. They want to know who you really are. Who I really am, Sean said slowly, is someone who has spent over 3 decades building a career based on the work, not on manufactured drama for television ratings. The audience murmured their approval at this, but Jonathan pressed on, seemingly oblivious to the shifting mood in the room. But surely you can see the irony, Jonathan continued, his voice taking on that condescending tone that had become his signature when he thought he was being particularly clever. Here you are, complaining about people focusing on your personal life. Yet you've made a career out of playing these larger-than-life characters who meet these dramatic ends. Boromir, Ned Stark, the list goes on. You've turned death into an art form. Those are characters, Sean replied, his patience clearly wearing thin. Written by talented writers, brought to life by entire teams of creative professionals. They're not gossip fodder or internet jokes. Come now, Jonathan waved his hand dismissively. You have to admit there's something almost comical about it at this point. The Sean Bean death scene has become as predictable as the sunrise. Don't you think audiences go into your films now just waiting to see how you're going to die this time? Sean's face darkened. You're reducing years of work, complex characters, meaningful stories, down to a punchline. And you're doing it for what? A few cheap laughs from your audience? I'm doing it because it's entertaining. Jonathan shot back, his mask slipping slightly to reveal something uglier beneath. And entertainment is what this show is about, not self-important lectures about the craft of acting. The studio fell dead silent. Even Jonathan seemed to realize he had gone too far with that last comment, but his ego would not let him back down now. He had committed to this path, and his pride demanded he see it through to whatever bitter end awaited. Sean stared at him for what felt like an eternity, his expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally settling on something that looked almost like pity. Self-important lectures? Sean repeated quietly. Is that what you think this is? Well, isn't it? Jonathan replied, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried moments before. You come on here, refuse to engage with perfectly reasonable questions about your public persona, and then act like we're somehow beneath you for asking them. Reasonable questions? Sean's voice was still quiet, but there was steel in it now. You ambush me with personal financial information, reduce my life's work to internet memes, and then call me self-important when I object to being treated like a circus act. The audience was fully on Sean's side now, their disapproval of Jonathan's behavior evident in their silence and body language. But Jonathan, perhaps sensing that his career might depend on salvaging this moment, doubled down instead of backing down. Look, Sean, I understand you're upset, but this is how television works in the 21st century. Audiences want authenticity. They want real moments, real emotions. They don't want polished press releases disguised as interviews. Real emotions? Sean stood up slowly, his full height imposing even in the bright studio lights. You want real emotions? Fine. Here's something authentic for your audience. Jonathan's eyes widened slightly. He had wanted to create a moment, but he was beginning to realize he might have miscalculated the kind of moment he was about to get. For 30 years, Sean continued, his voice carrying across the silent studio, I have tried to bring dignity and truth to every role I've taken. I have worked with some of the finest directors and actors in the world, and I have always tried to serve the story, not my own ego. Sean, please, sit down. Jonathan tried to interrupt, but Sean held up a hand. No, you wanted authentic. So let me give you authentic. What you've done here tonight is not entertainment. It's not clever. It's not even particularly original. It's just mean-spirited nonsense designed to make yourself feel important at someone else's expense. The cameramen looked uncertain, glancing between their director and the unfolding drama. Should they keep rolling? Cut away? This was uncharted territory for a show that usually stayed within safe boundaries. And the saddest part, Sean continued, his voice growing stronger, is that you have a platform that could be used to celebrate creativity, to highlight important work, to actually contribute something meaningful to the cultural conversation. Instead, you've chosen to use it for this. Jonathan's face was flushed now, his carefully constructed persona crumbling under the weight of Sean's words. Now wait just a minute. I've been doing this show for years. I've interviewed hundreds of guests, and they've all been perfectly happy to engage with my style of questioning. Have they? Sean asked pointedly. Or have they just been too polite, too professional, too concerned about their careers to tell you what they really think? The question hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the atmosphere even further. Jonathan opened and closed his mouth several times, searching for a comeback that would not come. Because I'll tell you what I think, Sean continued relentlessly. I think you've gotten so comfortable hiding behind the pretense of entertainment that you've forgotten there are real people sitting in that chair. People with feelings, with dignity, with lives that extend beyond whatever narrative you've decided to construct for your show. Sean, I think you're overreacting, Jonathan said weakly, but even he seemed to know how pathetic it sounded. Am I? Sean asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a host who has let whatever small amount of power this show gives him go to his head. You think you can say whatever you want, ask whatever you want, because you're the one with the microphone in the studio audience. Jonathan's producer was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, trying to signal for a commercial break, but Jonathan was too rattled to notice. He had lost control of his own show, and everyone in the room knew it. Well, you found out what happens when you try that approach with someone who won't play along, Sean continued. Someone who values their integrity more than they value being liked by you or your audience. I was just trying to make good television, Jonathan protested, his voice now lacking any of its earlier confidence. At whose expense? Sean demanded. Good television doesn't require humiliating your guests. It doesn't require turning people's personal struggles into punchlines. There are ways to be entertaining without being cruel. The studio audience began to applaud, slowly at first, then building to a sustained ovation. They were applauding Sean's dignity, his refusal to be diminished, his willingness to stand up to a bully who had hidden behind the veneer of entertainment for too long. Jonathan looked around desperately, realizing that his own audience had turned against him. This was his show, his stage, his carefully crafted kingdom, and it was crumbling around him in real time. Sean, please, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Jonathan tried one last time, but his voice was pleading now rather than commanding. The only misunderstanding, Sean replied, his voice calm again but no less forceful, was mine, thinking I could come here and be treated with basic respect. Sean looked around the studio one final time, taking in the faces of the audience members who were still applauding his stand against Jonathan's behavior. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what would surely become one of the most talked about television incidents in recent memory. But for Sean, the performance was over. You know what the real tragedy is here, Jonathan? Sean said, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to fill every corner of the studio. You had an opportunity tonight to showcase something meaningful. This film I came here to discuss, it's about real people facing real struggles. Working class families trying to maintain their dignity in the face of economic hardship. Stories that matter. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, sweat beginning to form on his forehead under the hot studio lights. His carefully styled hair looked disheveled now, and his trademark grin had completely disappeared. Instead, Sean continued, you chose to focus on tabloid gossip and cheap shots. You turned what should have been a celebration of collaborative storytelling into a personal attack designed to boost your ratings at my expense. Sean, I never meant for it to be personal. Jonathan said weakly, but the words sounded hollow even to him. Of course you did, Sean replied matter-of-factly. Every question you asked was designed to put me on the defensive, to make me uncomfortable, to create the kind of conflict that gets shared on social media. You researched my private life specifically to use it as ammunition. The audience murmured their agreement, and Jonathan could feel his carefully constructed world slipping away from him. He had built his career on being the lovable rogue, the cheeky interviewer who could get away with asking the questions others would not dare. But there was nothing lovable about what he had done tonight. And the most insulting part, Sean said, his voice growing stronger, is that you seem to think this passes for journalism. That ambushing guests with personal information and reducing their life's work to internet memes is somehow serving your audience. I was just trying to give the people what they want, Jonathan protested, but even as he said it, he could hear how desperate he sounded. What people want, Sean shot back, is authenticity, real conversation, genuine insight into the creative process. They want to understand how stories get told, what motivates actors and directors and writers to dedicate years of their lives to bringing these characters to life. Jonathan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He had been so focused on creating controversy that he had forgotten the fundamental purpose of his show. The audience was not there to watch him tear down his guests. They were there to be entertained, educated, and inspired. But instead of giving them that, Sean continued relentlessly, you've given them a masterclass in how not to conduct an interview, how to alienate your guest, disappoint your audience, and expose yourself as someone more interested in cheap thrills than meaningful conversation. The producer behind the cameras was making increasingly frantic gestures, but Jonathan was too stunned to respond. He sat there like a deer in headlights, watching his reputation crumble in real time. You want to know what's really ironic? Sean asked, though it was clear he did not expect an answer. All those death scenes you seem to find so amusing. They were about characters facing their end with dignity, heroes making sacrificial choices, people standing up for what they believe in, even when it cost them everything. The parallel was not lost on anyone in the studio. Here was Sean Bean, facing a kind of professional death, standing up for his principles, even though it meant walking away from one of the country's biggest talk shows. Those characters understood something you clearly don't, Sean said quietly. That how you face adversity, how you treat others when you have power over them, that's what defines who you really are. Jonathan's face was pale now, and his hands were trembling slightly. He looked like a man who had suddenly realized he was standing at the edge of a cliff. I think, Sean said, straightening his jacket, this interview is over. Sean, please don't go, Jonathan said desperately. We can start over, ask different questions, talk about your film. But Sean was already walking toward the edge of the stage. Some things can't be undone, Jonathan. Some words can't be taken back. You made your choice about what kind of show you wanted to run tonight. Wait, Jonathan called out, his voice cracking slightly. The audience came here to see you. They deserve to hear about your work. Sean paused at the edge of the stage and turned back to face the audience directly, ignoring Jonathan completely. The film is called Northern Lights, he said to the camera, his voice clear and professional despite everything that had just transpired. It's about ordinary people doing extraordinary things to protect their families and communities. It was made by an incredible team of artists who believed in the story we were telling. He paused, looking directly into the main camera. It's the kind of story that deserves better than this, he said simply, gesturing toward the chaos behind him. With that, Sean Bean walked off the Jonathan Ross Show stage, leaving behind a host whose career would never fully recover from the 27 seconds of condescending cruelty that had revealed his true character to millions of viewers. Jonathan sat alone at his desk, the studio lights suddenly feeling harsh and unforgiving. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. His producers scrambled to figure out how to fill the remaining airtime, but the damage was already done. In trying to create a viral moment at Sean Bean's expense, Jonathan Ross had instead created a viral moment that exposed him as exactly the kind of entitled, cruel host that audiences were growing tired of. He had gotten his controversy, his social media buzz, his headlines, but he had lost something far more valuable in the process: the respect of his audience and his industry. As the credits rolled over the empty interview set, one thing was perfectly clear. In a battle between dignity and desperation, between integrity and ego, between a man who understood his craft and a host who had forgotten his purpose, there had been only one possible winner. Sean Bean had delivered his most powerful performance yet, and he had not even been playing a character.